Hello, and welcome to the Leaders Lounge podcast. My name is Simon Cohen, founder of Cohesis, and today I am delighted to be joined by Vin Fordham Lamont, CEO of the Shire of West Arthur. So, Vin, great to have you here. Why not start by introducing yourself and giving us a bit of background about your current role and responsibilities?
Thanks, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am Vin Fordham Lamont. I've been in local government for 13 years now. I'm currently the CEO of the Shire of West Arthur in the southwest portion of the Wheatbelt region in WA. I've been here 3 years this month, and I guess my current role involves overseeing the strategic direction of the Shire, ensuring we deliver essential services to our community, but also managing growth and risk effectively. I work closely with council members, community members, other local governments and other stakeholders that have an interest in the same things we do. And we're basically trying to create a sustainable and thriving community for our ratepayers and residents.
Sure, and obviously there's a lot in there. What initially drew you to working in local government, and what has kept you in this field?
I have no idea what's kept me in the field because there's been a lot of changes that have made the job very difficult. But I guess initially I was attracted because the impact that the work can have on communities, and also I've always had a bit of an interest in local government. I remember back in year 10 at school when we did some work experience, and I managed to spend a couple of weeks at the city of South Perth. So I guess one of the things that has helped me stay in here is the fact that I've only entered, the sector relatively late in life. So I know a lot of people my age in my role are feeling pretty burnt out at this stage, whereas I like to think I've got some reserves of energy left to keep me going.
Yeah. And do you think that time outside of local government helps you inside local government? Is it helpful to have had other experiences that you bring into local government?
I think so, because of those differences in my career path. I like to think that I can bring different things to the equation, and I can look outside the box a little more than perhaps somebody who spent their entire career in local government. So I'm always keen to look at pilot programs or to look at ways of doing things differently than perhaps what may have been considered the traditional way of doing them.
And you mentioned earlier on around you're responsible for looking after the strategic direction of the Shire. Can you, without breaking any confidence or anything, can you give us some insights in terms of some examples of the strategic direction of the Shire? What is the Shire aiming to achieve over the next few years?
Well, I guess I probably spoke slightly incorrectly, because it's actually council's role to set the strategic direction of a local government. So whilst my role is to advise them if there's something they need additional information on, and then to implement the decisions of council. So every local government's required at this stage to have a strategic community plan, and essentially there's a lot of speaking with the community and consultation when that document is being prepared, because the idea is that we're getting the needs and wants from the community itself, and then it's up to council to sift through that and decide on, well, what are the strategic directions that we need to go in, what are those big picture things. And I always tell councillors, you're there to represent the community, but you don't have to sort of do everything that the community says they want, because you've got limited resources to be able to implement these things, so they have to make choices.
Yeah, and what kind of things are there is being worked on at the moment for the community?
Well, the big things that we're concerned about at the moment as a local government are things like the renewable energy transition. This Shire alone has got 6 different proponents who are proposing wind farms, and they may or may not all come to fruition, but if they did, we would have something in the vicinity of between 400 and 800 wind turbines just in the Shire of West Arthur alone, which is pretty significant and brings some issues that have to be worked through.
Do you see wind farms as being a good thing for the Shire, or can you not say?
No, it's a really good question, because we don't know. We're hopeful that it could be a really good thing, but it really does depend at this stage on the state government, because to date the state government has not shown the leadership and transparency that we would like them to in terms of setting frameworks to deal with these new sorts of developments. So wind farms have a potential to be a fantastic windfall for the community, or they can become a very divisive development. The other things the big things, I guess, is not necessarily unique to this Shire, but all through regional WA and probably Australia as well, is the shortage of housing for workers. Government programs at this stage are all focused on community housing, but the issues that a lot of us are facing, particularly when we're trying to become sustainable and grow our communities, is a lack of housing for workers.
Absolutely. And I know an area that you know very well as well. It's a few years ago now. I was up in the Shire of Minnie, and the tornadoes or hurricanes, what have you, had come through there and had destroyed a number of houses and so forth. And this was a bit of a problem. And I know that Shire had to almost become housing developers. They had to borrow money from their investment pool to actually build housing to actually keep the Shire growing and going. And that was a big shock for me. I didn't really expect the Shire to have to be able to fend for itself in that way. And that was a learning curve for me in terms of the other areas that regional local governments, smaller local governments, have to kind of fend for themselves in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I can completely understand how that would be a problem. And what can you do? What are you doing in response to that kind of issue?
You've opened up a can of worms, Simon. Really big issue.
I told you we'd have a good chat.
We like to think that we're fairly progressive and are looking outside the box on this one as well. But so we're part of a local group of councils called 4WDL, which are just the initials of the member councils, and we're all neighbours in the general vicinity of here. And so we've worked closely with ourselves and with the Wheatbelt Development Commission to sort of do a lot of studies and produce a lot of reports, statistical and otherwise, to be able to demonstrate to funding bodies that there is a major issue in the country with housing market failure, because of the fact that it costs so much more to actually construct a house in regional areas, but then what it costs to construct them is not what they're worth when the construction is completed. So we always joke, but quite seriously, that you could spend $500,000 on a 4x2 house, but the minute that you walk through the door and took the ownership, it might be worth $300,000. And so in that circumstance, it's very difficult to entice developers or investors to put money into the town, because it's just not viable.
Yeah.
So we've been putting together all this research, and then we've been talking to the state government, various ministers, about getting them to acknowledge that there is that market failure in regional towns, and then trying to actually get them to put some money into the problem. We have had a little bit of success, not so much with the state government, but with the federal government just recently, because there was some money called the Housing Support Program from the federal government, and we went in with 4 or 5 other Midwest and wheat belt shires and were successful in getting some money to do a subdivision of some residential land that we owned. And so we got 150,000 or so, and that was to undertake all the various studies, surveys, assessments required with the subdivision. And then we went in with the same group of councils, but a few extra, and there were 10 local governments that put in for Stream 2 of that fund. And that was to actually undertake headworks, because that's the killer with a lot of these developments, is the cost of the actual headworks and getting the services to the site. And when the Prime Minister was last in Perth, he made the announcement that we'd been successful. And that will be great, because that will then get us to the stage of being able to build. But of course, then we've got the problem of paying or finding people to pay to build houses.
Okay, so Vin, thank you for that. Let's talk about the work that Shires do in the community. What kind of community-driven projects are you currently leading at the moment, or are there any kind of particular projects that always, that you've been fond of throughout your career?
Well, we've got lots of projects going on at the moment. A lot of them are to do with wind farms. A lot of them are to do with housing. Some of them are to do with water security. We're looking at putting in bores and dams and pipes and that to capture and store water for not non-potable water for uses for firefighting, for stock, for our gardens and parks, that sort of thing. We know we're in a drying climate, and so that is certainly a focus of ours as well. This is the 4th local government I've worked for, and one's in the wheat belt, the current one's been in the Great Southern, 2 have been in the Midwest. And I guess over the time I've had a few different projects, but there was one project that I'm really enthused about, and it's actually not at this shire, but it was at the Shire of Carnamah. And there's an organisation in WA called the WA Vintage Tractor Association. It's shortened to TrackMac, and they had this plan for many years that they wanted to. People have. Each towns across Australia have these big things that become tourist attractions. The big koala, big pineapple, and all of that. Well, they had this idea they wanted to have a big tractor, and so they asked around. They wanted to get a town that was on board, and my hometown of Niangarup actually put in for it. And then when I was at Carnamah, a local farmer, Brendan Heusler, came to me and said, Vin, I've just read in the Elders Weekly that Niangarup have pulled out. We should do it. And I said, why should we do it, Brendan? And he said, because we've already got a Chamberlain Tractor Museum in town, and that is owned by Hal Walton, who used to run the Chamberlain John Deere dealership in town, but also had several dealerships across the Midwest. And he said, it would be great. Anyway, he got Hal on board, and I said, okay, well, I'm all for it. And eventually the council wasn't too enthused about it, though. But anyway, I ended up leaving, but we'd done a fair bit of work, in talking to manufacturers and so on.
Yeah.
And then out of the blue, he contacted me and said, it's going ahead. And this is after I got down to West Arthur. Then late last year, he invited me to the opening ceremony, and there were about 5,000 people there for
Yeah.
the opening in this little town of Carnamah.
Yeah, so I passed through it a few days before that event was going to happen, and I remember seeing it, and I was told later on it was a big success, and it was amazing how many people actually turned out to that event. So I actually remember just driving through before that, because I stopped off at the Shire on the way through and had a chat, and that's how I found out about it.
And well, you've seen it, so you know how big it is.
It is.
So
It's huge.
it's 4 times the size of the actual tractor, and it's exact replica. They had detailed drawings done and it was a particular model that was used extensively throughout regional WA for clearing and other agricultural purposes. But a lot of people outside the farming community wouldn't know that Chamberlain was a West Australian company, and those tractors were produced in Welshpool until later on, when John Deere is an American company, and they bought out Chamberlain. For a while, it operated as Chamberlain John Deere, and then it just became John Deere. But yeah, so it's a big thing for farming communities, not only in WA, but we're sure that it'll have people travelling from interstate as well, and it'll open up. It'll make people go up to Geraldton and places north as well. So I think it's going to be fantastic.
But coming back to what you were saying before about water security, because that's something that interests me as well. Coming from an economics background, water's one of scarce resource and what have you, and how you deal with scarce resources. But in terms of water security in the Shire, obviously it's important, for all the reasons that you mentioned. But do you feel it, is there a problem at the moment in terms of securing your water? Do you have to pipe much water in? And obviously I understand about fires being a different kind of thing, but for normal usage, given the climate that we have, how difficult is it to secure water? Not just necessarily in West Arthur, but also in the surrounding shires.
Oh, Simon, this is another in-depth topic that it take hours to go into. Look, obviously we have a drying climate. Most people agree on that. And water is a scarce resource. Australia is a dry climate, apart from if you live in Queensland.
Yes.
So unlike other places around the world, and even in some of the eastern states, WA doesn't have a lot of rivers. So it's because we don't have mountain ranges, I guess, as part of that. And so farmers over here have relied on dams as their primary source of capturing water. And if it's not raining as much and the climate's dry, then we're not getting the same amount of water. So then it's really important to be considering, where are we going to get water from? I have a personal concern about our drinking water. West or Darkin town site is on scheme, and we get our water along with Collie from the Harris Dam in the southwest. But even those dams with our drinking water are nowhere near filling up to capacity like they used to. So we have to, basically, for potable and non-potable water, we need to be considering how are we going to get our water. And so we've within the Shire of West Arthur, there are these two, I guess they're old underwater rivers, is what you would call them, the Hillman and Beaufort paleo channels. And so they're old rivers where there's just pools of water like aquifers still under there. And so we've spent a fair bit of time with the assistance of the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development and Department of Water and Environmental Regulation doing flyovers to try and update the mapping to see exactly where the water resources are, with the view that maybe at some stage we can tap into those. But also we've been working with the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation on other things to do with capturing water as well. So we've used programs of theirs to construct some extra tanks, put in some extra bores, some pipelines, some dams, cleaning out our town dam catchment area and improving that, putting a cover on that to minimise the evaporation. And then I guess the other thing is, if we find that there's water around but it's saline, then we have to start thinking seriously, like some of our neighbours, in terms of desalination.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, indeed. I mean, as you know, I come from the UK, and I obviously, not lived there for some time. I've been in Australia 7 years now, but I always remember, like, when it was, because obviously I know UK is a much wetter climate, I think it's fair to say. But I can remember so often having hosepipe bans, even though it was just, even though it had just rained and things like that. And it's a while ago now since I've been there and been living it. But the sense that the UK didn't really look after its water particularly well, it was just blasé. Then it always rains, so there's always going to be water. But at the same time, having hosepipe bans, and a lot of water was lost due to leakage and things like that. Not that I'm necessarily suggesting you can compare, and because I couldn't compare what's here to there, but do you think that water wastage in that way, I know we can't help evaporation to that extent, but do you think that Australia or in the locality is fairly good at protecting the water reserves that it has? Or do you also think that, there's a lot more that can be done to secure the water that's there from wastage leaks and things like that?
Well, that's a leading question, Simon. I think that probably in generations past, I feel that water was probably valued more than it is today. WA is unique in that we have such a large percentage of our state population living in the Perth metropolitan area, and indeed even in regional cities as well. So a lot of people there sort of, I feel like sometimes are a little bit immune to the reality of water shortages. And I certainly think that people are more wasteful than they ever used to be in terms of water. I think probably the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, I think, does a good job in terms of managing water resources. But I really do think that, moving into the future, that we do have to be cognizant that food and water are really the things that keep us alive. And it's good to be focusing on other things. But, I'd hate to think that we would not be able to be self-sufficient in terms of either water or food, because I'm sure, putting my pessimistic hat on, that in the future there will be wars fought over things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so next question then, Vin. What would you say are the biggest challenges small governments face when it comes to compliance, and how do you tackle them?
Compliance. I'll just consult my notes. I actually have written a few things down here.
Sure.
One thing I will say is that we, in local government, if you'd ask anybody that's been in local government for any length of time, and they will tell you that the compliance burden on local governments now is far, far greater than it ever has been in the past. We're being asked to do more, but with no extra resources. And I guess one of the concepts that we've all learned about is cost shifting, where another tier of government actually passes on responsibilities to local government, but as I say, doesn't provide any additional resources, financial or otherwise, to enable us to do that. And I guess we spend, CEOs, particularly in small local governments, where we're across a wider range of duties than perhaps our our metro cousins. We spend so much more of our time on compliance and reporting than we ever had in the past, which makes it, you might have questions from community members saying, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? Well, I'd really love to, but I'm having to spend so much time on compliance and reporting matters.
Yeah. And do you think that is because it's coming from such a low base that actually it's kind of like overshot where it needs to be? Do you think if there was the funding and the money there and the resources there, that actually the ask for this level of compliance is fair and justified, or do you think it's actually gone ahead of itself to where it is appropriate? And maybe that's different depending on the size of the shires or the number of people in the shires. Or what do you think?
Well, I think you'd probably get a range of different answers there, like you say, depending on the size of the shire. If you are talking to CEOs at smaller shires like mine, I think the view would be, well, actually, we would rather that the actual state government and federal governments were kind of fulfilling their responsibilities in certain areas rather than actually asking local government to do it. I suspect the reason we have things foisted onto us is because we're very good at, getting things done with limited resources. And maybe we've sort of been our own worst enemy because we've been able to, in the past, get things done with limited resources. We get more and more stuff chucked at us. One of the big things when we're talking about cost shifting is health. So, the number of health is not a local government responsibility, and the number of local governments that have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars each year on maintaining a GP, for example, is just absolutely phenomenal. Even our shire, we get a visiting doctor once, say, a week in Darkin, and I can't really go into finances specifically, but we have to pay an amount on top of what the doctor actually makes from the actual seeing the patients. We provide a surgery, we provide a fair bit of equipment, we provide a reception service, so on and so forth. And we have to pay a cash amount for every visit each week. So, but then there's some who are bigger local governments, slightly bigger, whose community demands having a doctor permanently. Got to provide a practice, fully equipped practice, a fully equipped car, rent-free housing, and so on. So it gets really, really expensive, but we don't get paid anything by the state or federal government to do that.
No. That's interesting, actually. And as you were talking, because you've shown me the facilities there, and they're absolutely fantastic. It does make me kind of like really think around the fact that if I was ill and I had to wait a week for the doctor to come, I've never been in that position. I've never lived regionally where you kind of faced with that. But I suppose if you know that you can see someone in that time, and when they come, you can actually get an appointment. Because again, from the UK, sometimes it's very hard to see people. There's lead times and wait times and things like that. So I think, trying to balance that with my own experience from, seeing medical people and having to wait, it's a very different thing. But I suppose it's the nature of the reality of being in regional WA that these are the different kind of things you have to contend with.
That just opened things up for me to start a political discussion, which I'm not going to do here. But
Fair enough. No, that's true.
We've got elections. We've got state and federal elections coming up, and one of the beefs of people living in the country is that in the past it was recognised by state and federal governments that people living in the country did have significant disadvantages to those living in the metro area. But they also realised that the wealth of the state, for example, is all generated in the regions. So, the mining and agriculture predominantly, it all comes from outside the Perth metro area. And so, we used to have good representation, political representation. Now, the changes that have been made, it's all leading towards, that, as I say, I'm just stating fact here rather than opinion. So the Labor Party has a principle of one vote, one value. And when you hear that, any fair-minded person would say, well, that seems like a fair principle, one vote, one value. But what it disregards is the fact that the vast majority of West Australians live in Perth. So the rest of us who are away from Perth, we are already living with disadvantages in terms of access to a lot of things, including medical facilities and services. So we don't have a say anymore. So it's very challenging.
No. One in a different area, and I suppose moving on from that, one area that is said to be the great leveller, no matter where we are in the world, is technology, in the sense of access to information and so forth. And obviously it's an area close to my heart and in terms of my profession. How do you see the advances in technology with automation, AI and what have you, and also the risks that come along with those advances? How do you see that playing out with the Shire? How does the Shire seek to leverage the benefits of technology, but also manage the risks associated with new technologies?
Well, I was always really excited when digital technology came around, and I thought that in the area of connectivity, that if you lived anywhere in Australia or anywhere in the world, you would have equal access to be able to anybody else living anywhere else in the world, and that is in the areas of business, in the areas of education, of recreation, of entertainment, of health, anything like that. I thought, well, that would be brilliant. But all of that relies on a fast and reliable connection. Yeah. And so I remember dealing, when I was a previous local government, and I was dealing with a private consultant who in telecommunications. He had a huge amount of experience working for federal government and a range of state governments. And he said when he was in Canberra, he actually worked and he was in a building, and that building, even on the same floor, one half of that floor, the people who were looking at the NBN and broadband and internet connection, and then the people who were dealing with mobile phone coverage were on the other half of that floor. And they even shared a lunchroom. And he said they didn't have anything to do with each other at all. And to me, they should be talking continuously, those two groups, because for the person on the street, it's kind of runs in together. Some people are using mobile phones for their data as well, so it starts to all bleed together. In terms of having said that, I have tried to bring us into the 21st century here at the Shire of West Arthur. So we've done quite a lot of things. So just personally in my own work, I use AI quite a bit when I'm trying to start a document, trying to jog some ideas in my head, things like GPT and that sort of thing. You don't believe everything in there, but it's good for getting a start on a document and making it read well. It saves me a lot of time. I use it even for things like agenda items for council, because it gives me a way of saying things that might have struggled to come up with. I also, and you would have noticed this previously when we've had online meetings, Simon, I've found something called Fireflies. And
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Right. So you've gone with Fireflies as well, yeah?
yeah, so it's brilliant because instead of sitting there in meetings, whether it's a meeting in person or an online meeting, it caters to both. And I don't have to sit there writing. I can give my whole focus to what the other people are saying.
Absolutely.
And then wham, bam, converts it all to text, and then I send it out as minutes.
Absolutely. And sometimes what I do, here's a tip for you, is if there's a meeting you can't go to, make sure you're invited. Fireflies will turn up and take the notes. You can read the notes and the transcript from the meeting without having to go.
Yes, I've done that as well. I discovered that. That was an added benefit.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. So I've been using Fireflies for a while. And one of the things that, if I was a meeting that we were in, and to your point around not trusting everything it says, especially when it comes to summary, it made out that I actually, somebody in the meeting, we were talking about vendors and so forth, and somebody in the meeting said that they didn't like something a vendor had done, and I had said something like, oh, well, okay, I agree. And the meeting summary said that I didn't like the person that had just said that, and that was like completely not true. So you have to take these things with a pinch of salt, and you definitely have to read them. You can't just send them out. But I agree with you; they're big time-saving devices.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the other thing is when I got here, we didn't have. I think we were one of 2 local governments in WA that didn't have a fully fledged ERP system. So we've gone and implemented one, and of course we used your services to actually help in the procurement side of that as an independent IT consultant, which was greatly appreciated. We didn't have any records management system in place at all, not even manually. The acting CEO, who spent a couple of months here before I got here, did just a spot check and found that I think in the previous 12 months, I think 10 or 11 records have been added into the kind of system that they were using. So we've now got an electronic records management system as well, which is working really well. We've got an electronic compliance calendar to help with that increasing flood of compliance requirements. And, we're always looking at things, looking at different things that Cohesis is working on as well. And it's just a matter of working out what our priorities are and trying to find programs that make us more effective and efficient and able to do more with less and in less time.
Absolutely.
The really important one as well is we're also using meeting management software. I only have an EA for 2 days a week. And so most of the 2 days she was spending on doing the monthly council meeting minutes and agendas. And so we've introduced some software for that. And it's made a huge difference to her ability to do other work as well in those 2 days.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Brilliant. And looking ahead, what future developments do you see shaping the Shire over the next few years? So we've mentioned wind farms being one. Is there anything else that's similar to that? Or I suppose I'm asking more in the technological space rather than outside of the technological space.
Maybe not so much the Shire itself, but we're basically still predominantly an agricultural community. So if we can get that connectivity that I talked about much improved to what it is, then it enables farmers to actually advance it in terms of their use of technology as well. And look, just historically, this is another interesting thing that city people may not appreciate. They have a picture in their head about, wealthy farmers and so on. I come from a farm, and my family, a very small farm, and I don't know how they've managed to continue operating all these years. But one of the reasons that farmers have been able to is because they've been early adopters of technology, and not necessarily IT, but in terms of other sorts of, seed technology, cropping techniques, harvesting techniques, breeding of grains and sheep and cattle and so on. So in my lifetime, if you looked at the cost of production versus the prices that the farmers are getting for their produce, that gap has been getting wider and wider and wider and wider. And the only way that farmers have managed to continue existing or operating is through that adoption of technology. And they would. There's a lot of it's happening already, but it only works if you've got good coverage and good connection. It helps. You can measure just about everything these days. You can have gauges and measurements on your tractors when you're seeding. You can see exactly the volumes of fertilizer and whatever that you're putting in.
Yeah.
You can work out what parts of the farm are getting more water than others, what crops you should be putting in some paddock or another. So it's absolutely endless. And if we want to protect our main livelihood in this district, then we've got to have better internet service.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. Often when I talk to, I think we've had this conversation, but also when I talk to other people as well, local government as a career, people getting into local government, it can be a difficult thing to get into, especially, obviously you've been in industry first and then you've been into local government. Sometimes, when I first came to Australia, it was for some people, it was hard to get a job in WA if you didn't have WA experience. Sometimes it's hard to get into local government if you don't have local government experience. And I've heard that banded around a little bit. But what advice would you give people who potentially would like to work in local government, would like the change, are feeling, that they'd like to give back to the local communities? Any particular pieces of advice you would share to those people?
Run away very fast. No.
I'm cut. No, go on.
No, look, it can be very rewarding, but it can also be very challenging. What I tell younger people, occasionally we have school groups come through here and so on, is the fact that there's a huge variety of career paths that you can actually choose in local government. For me, I guess it gives, for people that want to live in regional areas, it's one of the few well-paid roles as you get up to sort of like manager and CEO level that you can get living in a small country town, for example. It's interesting. There are a lot of people I'm finding now who are permanent long-term deputy CEOs.
Right.
So they've got up to that level, but they see the stress that CEOs are under, and they say, well, we like having somebody between council and us or between the public and us. I'm quite happy doing my job in supporting the CEO, but I don't want to go a step further. So I think what that means is that there's more people coming from outside the industry now, which I guess is a little bit different to what you were just saying. But there's certainly, I think, more opportunities now for people without that local government experience. Years ago, if you wouldn't have got a job at management level in local government if you didn't have local government experience. And also in a country local government, you would never have got a job if you said, oh, and I'll be going back home on the weekends and only staying in town during the week. Now, I'm a bit of an old school person in that way because I like to live in the community where I'm working. But many of my colleagues don't. And I don't blame them because, there's lots of good reasons for getting out. It can be a lonely job. And as a CEO in local government, and it's interesting. I would say that I've said this to my wife a few times. We've moved around quite a lot, obviously, and she's been able to make friends wherever she goes. And I said, well, when I think about my local government experiences, I've made colleagues and acquaintances, but I wouldn't really say that I've been able to make close friends. And part of it is not because I don't want to, but there's always that thing that you've got to keep distance between yourself and other people in the community, because you've got to perform a role, and it's a bit like police who go out and do their road patrols in neighbouring shires rather than their own, so they can still live in town.
No. And would you? One of my next questions. My next question was going to be, what's the hardest thing about being a CEO? Is that the hardest thing? So, in terms, I mean, I understand it's a pressurized job. I understand council, there's politics and what have you. But is that actually the hardest thing, that you don't feel as though you can, in that way, relax or make friends in that way?
Well, I'm fortunate. I don't feel that's a problem for me, because I've been married for 30 years and I've got a very, very understanding wife. But it's interesting that when I started local government, I remember my first ever CEO said, the most important thing that you have to remember is that your role is a two-person job. If you don't have support from home, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that was a person who'd spent his entire life in local government, and he was very, very spot on. It is really true. I think the difficult thing and what makes it stressful is that you can be, first of all, you're not a permanent employee. You only have contracts, and I know that's not unique to local government. Lots of people are in that position, but certainly, and now they've changed the rules just in the last couple of years, whereby even if the council is happy with the CEO and the CEO is happy to stay, you can't just roll the contract over like you used to be able to indefinitely. There's a maximum of 10 years, and after that it's got to be advertised. And it's interesting from my perspective, I could be wrong, but what I've noticed is that I haven't seen a single sitting CEO apply for their own job after the 10 years has come up.
Yeah. But that could be more to do with it being, I mean, to be honest, the longest thing I've ever done in my professional life is actually run Cohesis. Before then, I was around 4 years, 5 years, something like that in terms of my career. And to be honest, I actually didn't really care if I was in a permanent role or a contract. I did a lot of contracting as an IT professional and what have you. And for me, the only difference is between a permanent job and a contract is that a permanent job doesn't have a stated end date, whereas a contract kind of does. But I've been made redundant. I've had jobs disappear that were meant to be there and what have you. So, the employment landscape in technology and what have you is a very kind of at times fickle one. And it's like that in other industries as well, in many other industries and what have you. So it never really bothered me. I was just more around, am I happy what I'm doing? And if I'm not, well, then, okay, I'll back myself to try and do something else. But I can imagine that it's not the same for everyone. And other people, like my wife, she's spent 15 years at a particular role, and leaving that was quite, was a lot harder. It depends on the person. I know other people who spend roles 15, 20 and longer. I was talking to someone today, actually just very briefly, who had worked for a company for 30 years back in the UK and is struggling to get what he's entitled to from a pension perspective. So longevity doesn't necessarily mean things, and sometimes it's good to have a change. But I take your point that not one's applied for the job that they've been in for that time, and it'd be interesting to understand whether that is because of the job or the person, or the fact that actually more people do different things and have different types of roles in their career.
Well, I think the bigger concern for me as a challenge as a CEO is the fact that we can be doing everything that we're required to do and doing it in a very good fashion, and in a functioning local government that was functioning well, we would be considered to be doing a good job. But if you have a relationship breaks down with only takes one councillor, it doesn't even have to be the president or mayor.
Yeah.
And they can take the opposite of taking a shine to you. They can say, well, we don't want him. And even if it is only one, it basically, as a CEO, you might as well just start looking for another job, because our success as CEOs lives and dies by our relationship with council and councillors. And some of this reform that the government is bringing in and has brought in is all about, I guess, trying to make the people that aren't doing the right things, whether it be a CEO or a councillor, control that and a little bit better. But also some of the changes that have come in are going to have the opposite effect, and they're putting even more pressure on CEOs.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. And to the point you made before around CEOs and councils, and just generally, like the pressure only takes one person maybe within a council, doesn't have to be the mayor or anything like that. I've heard many stories of exactly the same thing, and also, seeing many other people in CEOs and others just think, you know what, it's too hard, I'm just going to move on and what have you. And then quite often nobody wins in that situation, because then they've got to start again, and then and it's harder for the community as well.
Simon, just as an interesting little note, in this 2025, and we're only at the beginning of February, I think there's been somewhere 7 or 8 CEOs in WA local governments that have resigned.
I did not know that. It's a bit like Premier League football managers then, like when they get the sack early on in the season after a few results. Well, we should do a comparison test. What's got better longevity, Premier League managers or CEOs?
Would you like to be Vin Fordham Lamont or Ange Postecoglou?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Not really, because I reckon that Ange might be doing pretty well financially.
I would say so. It'll be interesting, just changing tack, it'll be interesting to see how he goes. Being a Liverpool fan, Liverpool got knocked out the FA Cup in the week, and Ange Postecoglou was trying to defend his team, and in the press conference he basically asked, well, how did Liverpool go, trying to deflect from himself onto Liverpool, which is, I suppose I can see his need to kind of deflect going what's going on. But he has been a bit unlucky with injuries and so forth. Anyhow, as a last question, is there any takeaway that you would like to leave people with who are watching in?
Well, it's about local government's about community impact. So you get your satisfaction from improving the lives of the community members, whether it's through the facilities that you provide, or the services, or successful projects. And I guess the best outcomes come from collaboration between staff, council, and the community. And I'd probably go so far as to say the most successful outcomes are driven or are achieved when they're driven by the community. Yeah. That's probably the main takeaway.
And I think you know this anyway, we've had this conversation, but I always enjoy working with regional local governments. I personally get a buzz out of it. I can see the difference that it makes. To your point around the added compliance burdens and things like that, I see that as well, on behalf of clients. And I always enjoy trying to help people like yourself and what have you, and your colleagues alike. And I actually think it's quite nice that there are people there that are community focused, community driven, that are looking to try and make the lives of those in those communities better, and bringing their skills and experience to bear to make that happen. So thank you. Obviously you're in West Arthur, but where, if people are watching this and would like to reach out to you, how should they do so?
They should walk into 31 Burrows Street, Darkenham.
And if they prefer to use technology,
and ask for Vin. Look, they can, if anybody wants to, they can email me, and it's just simply ceo@westarthur.wa.gov.au, and that'll come directly to me.
Well, Vin, thank you ever so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I knew that what I said before we went and started recording that we'd have a good chat. And for everyone who's watching, if you enjoyed this conversation, please like and share it within your network or on your favorite podcast app. We are here to try and help inform and deliver a broad range of business insights to help business leaders make better decisions and just understand each other. And also when we talk to leaders in local government, which we will be doing, to help kind of share and bring forward and help illuminate some of the issues and talking points in local government. If you would like to appear on the podcast, or if you'd like us to address a particular topic, then please do contact me at leadersloungepodcast@cohesis.com.au, or you can reach out to me directly at simon.cohen@cohesis.com.au. And thank you for watching this, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one soon. Thank you.